This session is going to look to cover how to study and learn Leaving Cert History essays. Over the course of the session, we're going to look to break down the marking scheme, give, I suppose, a student-friendly kind of understanding of how the marking scheme works, and look to how we can use the marking scheme for our advantage in order to kind of maximize the marks we receive, firstly across each paragraph that we write at Leaving Cert History, and then at a wider scale across the whole essays that we write. After we break down the marking scheme, we're going to look to essentially break down and go through different study strategies that you can apply to any Leaving Cert History essay that you're looking to study, and we're going to share those with you guys and attendees as well. Before we get moving on today's session, I'd just like to highlight what's available on ExamRevision's website in terms of Leaving Cert History. So the whole course is covered for Leaving Cert History. So if we click into USA and the wider world here, the whole course is covered from the perspective of there's pre-recorded video lessons. So that's me kind of recording a lesson and walking you through each different topic on the Leaving Cert History course and explaining the finer details and the main events that take place over that, before linking that back to exam situations and showing you how often each question or topic comes up. Secondly, we have the whole course covered in PowerPoints, H1 standard notes, and what you just seen on the screen there was my favorite aspect of the Leaving Cert History course, which is ExamRevision's Leaving Cert History course, which is those self-correcting quizzes. I can't emphasize the importance of quizzing yourself and actively testing yourself on Leaving Cert History's topics in order to kind of, I suppose, maximize the benefits of your study. What you'll see on the screen there is just a kind of an example of the H1 standard notes, which use timelines, icons, just to kind of provide a visual representation of those notes as well. All of that's available on ExamRevision's websites, and really handy study tools to kind of maximize the mark that you're going to get for Leaving Cert History. Just to kind of show you where we're going to go today, first thing we're going to look at is the marking scheme for Leaving Cert History. So I'm going to go through a detailed breakdown of what the marking scheme is. I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then I'm going to break it down in student-friendly language. Most importantly, I'm going to show you how you use the marking scheme. The marking scheme is what's given to Leaving Cert History examiners when they're correcting your essays. How you use the marking scheme to maximize the amount of marks you receive across different paragraphs and then across wider essays as well. So we use the information that's available to us to guide the type of answers that we give. Secondly, I'm going to highlight how I suggest you structure your paragraphs to maximize the marks that you receive. So I suggest using a P.E.E.L paragraph approach: point, explain, point, evidence, explain, link. I'm going to go through that in detail, show you multiple examples of what that looks like in practice, and show you how you can maximize your structure of your paragraphs to, I suppose, maximize the results that you get. Next, we're going to look at how to plan for essays. So I suggest you plan at both micro and macro levels. Macro levels, kind of looking at a wider picture, kind of zoomed out view of what the essay is going to look like. What are our 8 paragraph titles that we're going to discuss? Micro, what are the finer kind of pieces of evidence and historically correct references that you're going to use in your essays in order to structure those essays to maximize the results that you get? And then finally, I'm going to show you how you study for Leaving Cert History essays. I'm going to share with you guys a template essay study plan that I give to all my students. All my students engage in this practice once a week with different essays over the course of 2 years. By the end of those 2 years for Leaving Cert History, they've really ingrained and kind of, I suppose, mastered that study process and looked at how we can structure our essays and study for our essays in order to enable us to recall that information on the day of our exam. Really important session that I'm covering today, something I'm extremely passionate about, and something that, or it's a process I engage with my students over the course of 2 years. First thing we're going to look at today is the Leaving Cert History marking scheme. So this is what the front page of that marking scheme looks like from an examiner's perspective. This marking scheme is given to all Leaving Cert History examiners, who are essentially the people that are correcting your Leaving Cert History essays and your exams over the course of July, when they correct your exams the month after you obviously sit the exam. This is the front page of the booklet. It gives them lots of information. It tells them what paragraphs should be, how each paragraph is marked, what type of things examiners are looking for in each paragraph and each essay. So this is a hugely valuable piece of information that we're going to need to use and need to understand to guide what our paragraphs and what our essays should look like. thing we need to look at in terms of our Leaving Cert History, or in terms of the Leaving Cert History marking scheme, is our CM and OE. So CM essentially stands for cumulative mark, and it's basically the mark that you'll receive for the historical content evident within your essay. So you're marked upon the, essentially I like to refer to it as the historically correct references that you make, and that CM is marked out of 60. I'm going to show you what that CM looks like now in 1 minute. Second thing that you pick up marks for in your Leaving Cert History essays is your overall evaluation. Now, this is a mark assigned to your essay based upon the general quality of your answer, and I suppose how you've answered your essay within the parameters or within the context of the set question. So have you answered the question that's been asked? So you're always marked out of 40 marks, and it's more of a snapshot judgment that the examiner will make on your essay basically after they've read the whole thing. So your cumulative mark is, I suppose, added up as the examiner corrects your essay, while your overall mark is a snapshot decision made at the end, and he marks it out of 40 then as a result of that. Direct quote or direct reference to the marking scheme that's provided to Leaving Cert History examiners, and this is what we'll call a sliding scale. So your cumulative mark, or your CM, which I'm going to refer to it from now on, is marked on a sliding scale out of 12. So it's marked from 0 to 12. The least amount of marks you can receive for your paragraph is 0. The most amount you can receive is 12. The idea of a sliding scale means that the examiner will read your paragraph and give it a grade or assign a grade via 0 to 12, depending on whether it's excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. Now, I'm going to show you this in a little bit more student-friendly language on the next slide, because it's going to show us what our paragraphs need to say. But I just want to highlight one word to you now. That's, I suppose, a key word in a document, and a key word we as historians, or we as Leaving Cert History students, need to consider in every aspect of our historical writing. That word is analysis. We're going to see that word come up again and again over the course of this document, the Leaving Cert History marking scheme, and it's going to really need to guide and tell us how we need to, I suppose, phrase our writing for Leaving Cert History. Cumulative mark sliding scale will look like this in a little bit more student-friendly language. So the examiner has to assign a descriptor to the paragraph that you've written. So our descriptors are down the left-hand column here, and each descriptor has a mark assigned to it. So we're going to start at the top and work our way down to the bottom. So if we look at the first descriptor, an excellent paragraph will receive 11 to 12 marks. And I suppose the characteristics of that excellent paragraph looks like this. That paragraph must be an outstanding piece of analysis, exposition, or commentary, clearly expressed, accurate, and must contain substantial information. Now, I just want you to take a minute and just think about the characteristics of an excellent paragraph there. An outstanding piece of analysis. To me, it sounds very, very difficult to achieve. And we're going to look at, I suppose, the most common awarded marks for paragraphs at a later point, but let's just keep that at the forefront of our mind. A very good descriptor will receive 8 to 10 marks, and the characteristics of that very good paragraph will be very good information, accurate and clearly expressed. Before I move forward, I just want to maybe highlight the differences between those two paragraphs. An excellent paragraph, outstanding piece of analysis, or a very good, just an 8 to, or just a or very good information, and receive 8 to 10. So there's a huge discrepancy or huge difference between what an excellent paragraph and a very good paragraph looks like, and that's going to dictate, I suppose, how we're going to look for and structure our whole essays. A good paragraph then, 6 to 7 marks, worthwhile information, reasonably well expressed. And I'm going to highlight that phrase, worthwhile. I'll come back to that at a later point. But very, very achievable. And I like to think about myself, can I provide worthwhile information in Leaving Cert History in a time pressurized environment? I think that's way more achievable than giving an outstanding piece of analysis under that time and that pressurized situation. A fair paragraph, you'll receive 3 to 5 marks, and the descriptors are limited information, barely stated. And a poor paragraph, hopefully none of us will be achieving this, 0 to 2 marks, trivial or irrelevant, grave errors included. Now let's look at these in a little bit more detail before we progress. Focus in on our cumulative mark and our excellent descriptor. So as we can kind of hopefully gauge by judging by the characteristics of an excellent paragraph, outstanding piece of analysis, it's going to be extremely rare to be awarded an 11 to 12 marks on a paragraph in a Leaving Cert History essay. I like to kind of phrase this or think about this situation is, in order for you to achieve an 11 to 12 or an excellent descriptor on each paragraph, you almost need to portray the historical event in a new light for the examiner. That's extremely difficult to do. Examiners are very experienced historians. They've seen and studied these events over the course of years and decades, and it's very hard to portray that event in a new light for the examiner. So we need to manage our expectations around thinking, okay, I'm going to achieve 11 to 12 in every single paragraph, because that's probably not going to be the case. And if we look at how those marks are awarded, it's very rare that they're actually given to students. So we need to just manage our expectations around that excellent descriptor. And we need to look at the other descriptors that maybe are more achievable in a time sensitive situation, such as the Leaving Cert History exam. And we're going to plan for our essays using that now. So if we look at the descriptors good and fair, the most common paragraphs awarded are good and fair. So in that 3 to 7 kind of mark range that we'll expect to get. And this is really important because it's going to tell us how many paragraphs we need to write in our Leaving Cert History essays to maximize the amount of marks that we receive. So we're going to use this information that is given to us in the marking scheme. These are the most commonly awarded marks, 3 to 7, and we're going to use that to kind of guide how long our Leaving Cert History essays should be. So that's why I kind of stress the importance of, from a student's perspective, you need to have an understanding of the marking scheme, because it tells you what to do. It tells you what type of information to include in your essays. It tells you how you should structure your paragraphs. It tells you what your paragraph should be about. It also tells you how long your essay should be. That's a question I get asked as obviously a Leaving Cert History teacher and then a content creator for ExamRevision. And I obviously work hugely with students across the country through Grit and Grinds and stuff as well. But how long should my essays be? Well, it's actually in the, there's rough guidelines of it in the marking scheme. So we need to make reference and have a good understanding of that. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the overall evaluation, or the OE, as I'm going to refer to it now. So the OE, once again, is that snapshot decision made by examiners after they've read your essay, and it's marked out of 0 to 40. So when awarding the OE, they're basically evaluating the quality of your answer by taking in 3 things into account. Firstly, they're going to take into account what extent you have shown the ability to analyze the issues involved in the question. For example, is it more than narrative? And the phrase I like to use with my history students is that as historians, our job isn't to tell the story of history. It's to analyze the story and look at trends and investigate different impacts of that historical event. So our job isn't to tell the story, it's to analyze the story. And that's really important to understand, because that word analyze is made reference to in the marking scheme multiple occasions. I'm going to highlight to you how much it actually comes up. Second thing the examiner's looking for when they're giving your overall evaluation, or what they're taking into account, is, has the student used relevant evidence to support their analysis? That's a phrase taken directly from the marking scheme. And what you'll start to notice is the marking scheme hasn't said, has the student used relevant evidence to support their answer or to support their explanation or description. It's looking for you to analyze historical events. So once again, our job isn't to tell the story of history, it's to provide evidence to support analysis. This is telling us how we need to structure our individual sentences and paragraphs within the Leaving Cert History essay, and I'm going to give you multiple tools to help you achieve that. Third thing the overall evaluation is, I suppose, or what examiners are taking into account when they're looking at the overall evaluation, is they're looking at your ability to argue a case, reach conclusions. Basically, have you answered the question that's been asked? And I can't stress the importance of this, because obviously working with students across the country, a question that I get asked a lot is, how do I just learn answers off for Leaving Cert History? And it's something I'd never encourage a student to do for Leaving Cert History, because the marking scheme actually wants you to be reactive. It wants you to be able to adapt to questions and phrasing of questions differently, and wants you to actually think and consider about the historical events and the analysis that you're putting forward. So I'd never recommend learning whole paragraphs off, we learn about different pieces of evidence and different pieces of analysis that we're able to adapt and use across multiple different essays and from across multiple different perspectives. And that's really important, that you have to answer the question that's been asked. I'm going to give you 2 strategies later on today on how you actually answer the question that's been asked and how you make sure that you do it in every single paragraph. Just to show you what the overall evaluation looks like from an examiner's perspective, this is a screenshot taken from the marking scheme. So once again, our overall evaluation is marked on a sliding scale, except our sliding scale this time is marked from 0 to 40. So you'll see we have our different descriptors. Once again, we have excellent to very weak this time, and the sliding scale goes from 0 to 40, as I said. So the examiner will read your essay. They'll add up your cumulative mark or your CM as they go throughout that essay, and afterwards they'll make a snapshot decision. I think that was a very good essay. I'm going to give it 31 out of 40. My justification is for that because it was very good, it wasn't excellent, and it did answer the set question that's been asked. It contained accurate and substantial information. So they used the descriptors here to make that snapshot decision. So they'll look at your essay, they'll read your essay, look at it and see which descriptor fits it best. So to look at that, or just before we move forward, I'd like to highlight one more word to you guys. So this is probably the 4th page of the marking scheme that we've seen so far. And I'm going to highlight another word to you guys: analysis. It's the 4th page of the marking scheme, I believe, and this is the 5th time we've seen that word. So if we really need to, well, if we're considering H1 standard and we want those H1 and H2 level points that are associated with writing at this standard standard in history, we need to be considering analysis. We're not here to tell the story, we're here to analyze it. So our H1 standards and our H2 standards are going to be providing analysis. We're going to go above and beyond. We're not just going to be telling the story, we're going to be analyzing the story, and that's really, really important. So if we look at our overall evaluation, or OE sliding scale, a little bit more student-friendly language, this is what it's going to look like. So once again, we have our sliding scale and our descriptors in the left-hand column here, and each descriptor is assigned a certain marking range, and then there's characteristics assigned to each descriptor. The examiner will read your essay, see which characteristics fit your essay best, and then it'll assign a mark from that, I suppose, marking range for your essay. So a descriptor, or the marks awarded to an excellent overall evaluation for an essay, is 34 to 40, and the characteristics of that is excellence in its treatment of the set question, particularly if it shows detailed learning, wide reading, I'm going to highlight that word, and analysis as well, or extensive coverage. So what that tells us is we need to be able to show that we have engaged in that kind of historical process of reading, looking at different perspectives from events, and for me, that tells us we need to go out above and beyond outside the classroom. What I suggest to my students that we change that idea of wide reading to wide reading, viewing, or listening. Books, documentaries, podcasts, we need to be engaging with them, of course, across the 2 years of history, Leaving Cert History, and that's going to provide us with extra information, quotes from historians, quotes from key personalities along the course that we're going to be able to include in our essays. And I can't stress the importance of that. You know, it's often quite a throwaway statement from a teacher that you need to, engage in your own independent reading and study on this topic. However, the Leaving Cert History course literally makes reference to that. So if you're thinking about that H1 standard at Leaving Cert History, that's what an excellent over OE mark is. It tells us we need to engage a wide reading, and that's really important. Let's keep going anyway. We have our very good, it's going to achieve a 28 to 33 mark on that sliding scale, and the characteristics are this: very good but not excellent in its set treatment of the set question, accurate and substantial history. So very reasonable to achieve 28 to 33 if we're engaging in, I suppose, the steps that we look to over the course of the year. Good paragraph then, 22 to 27. Good standard of treatment of the set question without being exceptional in the information or commentary supplied. Then we have fair, 16 to 21. Fair attempt at the set question but has, I suppose, defects, e.g. it's incomplete coverage, missing key events, or it has irrelevant data that's included. Weak, hopefully none of us are going to be in this range, 10 to 15. Poor in that it fails to answer the questions as set but has some merits. Very weak, 0 to 10. Then we have our very poor answer, at best only offers scraps of information, and hopefully none of us are going to be there. So that's our sliding scale, that's our OE, and hopefully we understand from an examiner's perspective how they're marking your OE in your exam as well. It's really important, and what I can't stress enough there is that idea of wide reading if we're looking at that H1 standard. Or the Leaving Cert History essays or Leaving Cert History marking scheme also tells us what a paragraph could be. So once again, question I'd often get from my students is, but like, what do I write a paragraph about? Very valid question as a student, and very valid question for me as a teacher. Like, what is a paragraph supposed to be? Who would have thought that it's actually there available to us in the marking scheme? And this is what examiners will use when they're looking at your paragraph, and they go, is that a paragraph? Can I mark that paragraph as one separate entity? Or should I group these two paragraphs together and mark those two? So this is what it gives us. I'm going to describe it in a little bit more student-friendly language. So there's multiple different types of paragraphs. I'm going to suggest we're really only focused on one. That's what I suggest to my students. I'm going to highlight that to you now because the other ones I find can be quite difficult. I'm going to go through the different types. I'm going to highlight which one I think is the most important. So the different types of paragraph is, firstly, you can write an introduction. An introduction should provide background information, or historiography as a historian would call it. So historiography is when you provide background information about a situation or event or a key personality in history. So if we're looking at the Anglo-Irish Treaty, obviously the War of Independence is going to be our historiography there, and it's going to be rooted and it's going to be extremely important in our introduction. We could also use a paragraph to define key terms, or what I like to do is explain the essay's approach, and you'll see that in my examples as we progress down today. So in my introductions, I explain the approach of my essay. So I'll usually react to the essay title. So if we're thinking Anglo-Irish Treaty, it's going to be something about controversial. I'll describe how the negotiations and the events thereafter the Anglo-Irish Treaty can be seen as controversial. Then I'm going to explain my approach to the essay. Firstly, I'm going to discuss how the selection of the Irish delegation was controversial, as we see a wide spectrum of nationalism. So we have our examples of Collins, who was, I suppose, Cathal Brugha, who was quite militant Republican. We have Arthur Griffith, who was quite moderate, and we have Collins somewhere in between. Secondly, my second paragraph is going to discuss should De Valera have gone to London and the controversy associated with this. So when we describe our types of or when we are looking to write our introduction, I suggest we explain the approach of our essay. We generally tend to not pick up good marks in our introductions anyway. Second type of paragraph, the one I'm going to suggest that we write almost all our paragraphs about, is we write about an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. So if we're studying fascism in Italy, or the characteristics of fascism in Italy, one episode, phase, or stage in that sequence of events is the March on Rome and Mussolini's rise to power. What's important to understand is we don't lump 2 or 3 events into one paragraph, because there should be one event in each paragraph, an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. So for example, something, or a non-example of that, or something that you shouldn't do, is if you're talking about Mussolini's rise to power, you shouldn't lump in the March on Rome and the 1924 general election into the same paragraph, because they're 2 different episodes or stages in that sequence of events. That's really important, and this is the type of paragraph I suggest we write almost all of our paragraphs in Leaving Cert History on. Thirdly, we can also write a paragraph on an aspect of a topic or issue with supporting factual references, and this is where it kind of gets a bit ropey for me, or it gets a little bit difficult to actually define what our paragraphs are. So I wouldn't really recommend studying and focusing on trying to do that. Number 4, we could also write a point in an argument or discussion with supporting factual references. Once again, I think that's kind of bordering the line of opinion rather than actually discussing or analyzing historical events. So I kind of try to stay away from that, or I try not to plan for those types of paragraphs. And then fifthly, it could be an explanation of a relevant concept with supporting factual references. This I can actually see the benefit of, and I can see the merit in. So if you're dealing with, we'll stick with characteristics of life in fascist Italy. So you could write a paragraph explaining the characteristics of fascism with supporting factual references of where those characteristics of fascism are evident in Mussolini's Italy. So that's the type of paragraph that we could write there when we explain what fascism is. It would usually be paragraph 1 of that essay, if I'm being honest. And then 5 or 6, this is where the kind of examiner can come in and kind of, support you picking up extra marks. So a type of paragraph could also be a number of significant relevant facts, explanations, or opinions, which, although are not connected, can be taken and assessed as a paragraph equivalent. And this kind of gives the examiner a little bit of autonomy, or a little bit of a freedom to kind of look at your exam and look at your essays and kind of lump to kind of, especially in that kind of time pressurized situation. And if you're really under time pressure in the exam, you kind of just, brain dump your ideas onto the page. The examiner can kind of piece those together and mark that as a paragraph. So really kind of handy. And then finally, we have a good concluding paragraph, which is not mere repetition. It can be hard to write a concluding paragraph, and we'll go through steps that I'd suggest to do that in this session. But once again, we have to develop that skill over 2 years. It shouldn't just be an afterthought. So consequently, we've looked at the Leaving Cert History marking scheme. Now we're going to use that information to basically tell us and guide us what we need to be writing, how long our essay should be, how we should structure each paragraph, how long each paragraph should be. So as a result of kind of analysing the marking scheme, I've come up with this idea of the sweet spot of Leaving Cert History essays, and I call it the 10 paragraph essay. I'm going to show you my thought process and how I've got to this point. So every single essay that you write on your Leaving Cert History paper is marked out of 100 marks. Your CM, cumulative mark, accounts for 60 marks. Your OE, your overall evaluation, accounts for 40 marks. As every paragraph is marked out of 12 cumulative marks, and the majority of students only receive 4 to 7 marks per paragraph, we're going to write 10 paragraphs, including an introduction and a conclusion. That means our cumulative mark is marked out of 60. If we divide 60 by 10, that means we only need to pick up 6 marks on average per paragraph, and that lands us right in that range of average marks that students achieve. So if you can take away one thing from today's sessions, is that when you're planning your paragraphs and planning your essays, you should be aiming to write 10 different paragraphs, because that means you only need to average 6 in every single paragraph, 6 out of 12, and you're going to be up towards the higher end scale of your cumulative mark and picking up close to 60 marks out of 60, and that's where we need to be. So the sweet spot 10 paragraph essay is what we need to be aiming for when we're planning our essays. Kind of leads us into the question then that my students would ask me at this point, but what does good historical paragraphs look like? So there's 6 things we're looking to do in our good historical paragraphs, or 6 kind of characteristics of good historical writing that we need to start thinking about. So in every single paragraph, we need to react to the question. We need to state the main point of your argument. You need to provide factual evidence. So I like to think about that as maybe not even 6 to 8. Maybe we could change this to like 4 to 6 historically correct references per paragraph. Let's get rid of 6 to 8 there. I prefer maybe 4 to 6. You have to explain the evidence that you provide. So I suggest to my students, pick 1 or 2 pieces of factual evidence and explain that evidence in, I suppose, the context of the question and the event that you're discussing. In every second or third paragraph, you should show evidence of outside reading, watching, or listening. Think back to our H1 standard of an OE marked on that sliding scale. So H1 standards, or H1 standard students will display evidence of outside reading, is what the marking scheme says. So in every second or third paragraph, we can display evidence of outside reading, watching, or listening. That's pushing up our OE, pushing us up towards that H1 standard. And then at the end of every single paragraph, we need to link your argument back to the question. And I cannot stress the importance of that enough. Really quickly have a look at what good historical writing looks like as an example from a paragraph created by one of my students. So this is taken from Eucharistic Congress essay. It's paragraph 4, where we discuss the social impacts of the Eucharistic Congress in Ireland. So I'll show you the length really quickly, and we're going to flick to the next slide to kind of go through this in a lot more detail, to be honest. So you can see that the length is quite standard there. When we write this on an A4 page, for me, what I'm looking for is just under half an A4 page. So a little less than half an A4 page is what we're looking for. So let's have a look at this answer and read through it together and break it down in lots more detail so we can identify the aspects of good historical. So let's read through it together. It could be argued that the social impacts experienced as a result of the Eucharistic Congress further consolidated the controversy of partition on the island of Ireland. Firstly, the success of the Eucharistic Congress enabled the development of an Irish Free State Catholic identity that was in complete contrast to the Ulster Unionist identity that had formed in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Consequently, this led to an us versus them mentality on the island, which was demonstrated over the next 100 years and is still evident in parts of the island today. Additionally, the success of the Congress led to people becoming proud of the Catholic Irish identity. As a result of the development of two distinctive separate religious identities on the island of Ireland, communities became increasingly more divided. This is evident as at the time of the Congress, people in the north did not become involved in the event. Catholics travelling from the north were attacked for their participation in the Congress. Therefore, the clear differences in religious ideas increased tensions on the island. However, as famous activist John Hume stated, difference is an accident of birth and therefore should never be the source of hard or conflict. We can therefore see that the social impacts of the Eucharistic Congress consolidated the idea of partition on the island of Ireland. Let's break that down into a little bit more detail so you can clearly see the good characteristics of historical writing in play. So first thing this student did excellently was react to the question. So the question was around how Eucharistic Congress consolidated partition or contributed to partition. Consolidated partition, I apologize. So you can see here that this student has made the point to react to the question and said that the social impacts further consolidated that idea of partition. Next thing that student did was state their main arguments. Their main argument was that there were separate identities on the island of Ireland that was contributed towards by the Eucharistic Congress. Next thing that student did is going to provide 4 to 6 pieces of factual evidence. So she's got 4 pieces of factual evidence here. Lastly, that student has explained 1 or 2 pieces of that evidence. So you can see that through that statement there. This is evident as. Fifth thing that student's done is provide evidence of outside reading, viewing, or watching. So that was that's from a podcast that I sent to my students around Eucharistic Congress and identity on the island of Ireland, and the person discussing that podcast at the end included that quote from John Hume. So a really powerful quote there by Hume. And then the last thing that student has done has linked their argument back to the question. So she has bookended that paragraph there. She's reacted to the question in the first part and she's linked it back to the question in the last part. So what this student here is doing is kind of overtly saying or openly stating to the examiner, look at me, I'm answering the question that's being asked. So she's bookended that paragraph, and that's what I'd suggest to do. You make a point in the first one and you link it back in the second one. Last thing that you'll see that has contributed to this student achieving a very high OE in her essay is she's used linking words throughout. So those linking words, I'd say you could see there, it could be argued that. That's a linking word that helps to start a paragraph. Firstly, consequently, additionally, as a result of, this is evident as. However, we can therefore see multiple examples of how this student has used linking words that help, I suppose, contribute to the flow of her writing. So we've seen the marking scheme. We've kind of identified characteristics of good historical writing. We've seen sample answers of where that good historical writing has been applied. Now it's about using strategies to get us to that point. So the first strategy I'm going to suggest how we structure our paragraphs. So in order to include the characteristics of good historical writing in our paragraphs, I suggest following a P.E.E.L approach. So P.E.E.L stands for point, evidence, explain, and link. Let's see what that looks like in action. So in order to help you write in using a P.E.E.L paragraph approach, what I suggest using are these linking words. So this is going to be shared with you guys as well, or you can just screenshot the screen here. I actually glue this into the front page of my students' copybooks, and I suggest using it whenever you're writing a Leaving Cert History essay. It'll help you structure your paragraphs. So if you're looking to make a point, you could use phrases like, it could be argued that, historians have argued, the sources around this time suggest, we can infer from the sources that, If you're looking to provide evidence, there's two pieces of evidence that you can provide. Evidence that's going to look to join ideas. So you can use phrases like firstly, secondly, thirdly, in addition, furthermore, moreover. And the second type of evidence you can provide is evidence that's going to change your main ideas. So you can use phrases like, however, conversely, on the other hand, alternatively, but. Then you need to pick one or two pieces of evidence that you provide and explain that evidence. You use phrases like this means that, therefore, consequently, as a result of, because, we can see from this. And then the last thing you need to do is link your paragraph and your points back to the main question to show the examiner that you're answering the question that's been asked. To do that, we use phrases like we can therefore see. It is clear that the most important factor is in conclusion. So these are the phrases I recommend trying to embed in your essays. They're going to boost your structure of your paragraphs, which is going to boost your cumulative mark, and it's going to boost your OE because you're going to be using those linking words I discussed in the last slide to kind of boost that OE and show the examiner that you're answering the set question that's been asked. Next up, we can look at how we plan for Leaving Cert History essays. So when planning for essays, I suggest looking at it from two different viewpoints: macro or big picture planning. So we zoom out all the way out and we look at, okay, what's the 8 paragraph titles that I need to discuss in this essay? Or micro level planning. So we zoom in on each single paragraph and we look at, okay, what is the evidence I need to provide for this essay? So I'm going to show you an example of my micro and macro plans, and then I suppose I'm going to look at how we start to plan those ourselves and self-regulate ourselves around that. Okay, so if we look at our macro plan here, this is for an essay. What were the main events of the Eucharistic Congress in 1932 and how did it contribute to Irish identity? So the first thing that we need to do in every single paragraph is write an introduction. Our marking scheme tells us that we need to do that. And then we need to think about, okay, how we're planning for our essays so that every paragraph only deals with an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. The sequence of events here is the Eucharistic Congress and the lead up and the events that took place over the week and the impact that they had. So each paragraph should just deal with one phase of that. So if we look at our first paragraph here, the influence of the Catholic Church in Irish society, that's a phase in this sequence of events. Then we look at the organisation of the Congress, the events over the week, the mighty invasion of Croke Park, promotion of church-state relations, and so on. When we look at our microplan, our micro plans, they're going to look a little something like this. Okay, so it provides us with the finer details and the pieces of evidence that we need to discuss in every single paragraph. So we're not going to go through every single phase or step of this micro plan here because it would obviously take us lots of time, and this Saturday session isn't about the Eucharistic Congress, it's about how we study and structure our essays. But if we have a look at paragraph 1 here, okay, so paragraph 1's essay title is the influence of the Catholic Church. So when we're planning our micro plans, we need to provide 4 to 6, if you remember our characteristics of good historical writing, we need 4 to 6 pieces of evidence for every single paragraph. So we need to come up with 4 to 6 pieces of evidence or historically correct references that's going to enable us to write an H1 standard paragraph here. So if we focus in on this, let's read through it together. The first piece of evidence we're going to use here is the Catholic Church is a powerful organisation in Irish society. It influenced people at election time. There was excellent relationships between the clergy and lower classes in Irish society. They were able to influence ideas. And there was a poor relationship between clergy and upper class members. That was not common in Irish society. If we flick forward one more slide just to show you that I've done this for 8 different paragraphs on the essay. You can see paragraph 3 through 6 here. We've got 4 to 6 pieces or historically correct references for every single paragraph. That's going to enable us to structure and write our paragraphs at a high level. I'm going to skip forward and I'm going to go through one paragraph and I'll go through how I write that paragraph once more. So if we look to, well, we looked at social impacts in the earlier part of this session, so I'm going to look at social impacts here. So if we look at, I suppose, the pieces of evidence that was used to write that paragraph by my student, this was the evidence that she was given. So consolidated the controversy of partition on the island. The success of the Eucharistic Congress enabled the development of an Irish state Catholic identity that was complete contrast to the Ulster Unionist identity, led to us versus them mentality. Catholics travelling from the north were attacked. People became proud of their Catholic Irish identity. So these were the pieces of evidence that my student used to write that sample paragraph that you would have seen earlier that contained all those characteristics of good historical writing. Your biggest takeaway here is, and I'll share my template will be sent over to you for our micro and macro plans, is to when you're planning for your essays or before you write an essay, you should sit down and plan, okay, what are the 8 paragraph titles I'm going to write about? Each paragraph title should be an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. And then you should go micro planning, look at every single paragraph and pick out 4 to 6 factual pieces of evidence that are relevant to the paragraph title, and you just write them into the box. And then you sit down and you write each paragraph, focusing on using that P.E.E.L paragraph approach, and that's going to enable you to become an excellent writer in history, and it all contributes to that wider kind of study and learning of the information for each paragraph. Show you how I kind of go through that P.E.E.L paragraph approach with my students now once again. So once again with our P.E.E.L paragraph, and this is a great way if you're struggling to grasp that concept of what is a point, what is evidence, what is explanations, and what is our link. I'll give this kind of template to my students, and once again this will be available for you guys to download, I believe. And I just get students to write out, okay, what do you think the point is, what is the evidence, write out your explanations, write out your link in this format, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So this is from another paragraph from the Eucharistic Congress, so we'll keep it all in line today. So the point is that the organisation of the Congress demonstrates the building of community identity in the newly formed Irish Free State. Our evidence is Garda Commissioner was appointed as organiser. Second thing was parishes all over the country began organising their areas. Third thing was the 1932 election was held or rearranged. And then fourth thing was Dubliners decorate the city. There are 4 pieces of evidence that we're going to need. We can explain those evidence by saying stuff like how Owen O'Duffy would meticulously plan every detail of the event, finding homes, accommodation and food for thousands of people expected to arrive. If we were going to use number 2 as our piece of evidence, parishes all over the country began organising their areas of the city. We could talk about how they would hold prayer meetings and collect money for decorations for the village. And we won't go into too much detail there, but we can see how each piece of evidence is linked to an explanation. So 1 is with 1, 2 is with 2, 3 is with 3, 4 is with 4. So now when we're structuring our paragraph, we can just follow that kind of structure and that plan that will help kind of embed that P.E.E.L paragraph approach in our writing. Last thing we need to do is link. So the organisation of the Eucharistic Congress helped contribute towards the development of a distinctive Irish identity, because the paragraph or the essay title asks us to discuss the Eucharistic Congress and its impact on identity. Paragraph looks like in reality then would be something like this. We use our point. We pick our first piece of evidence and we explain it. We pick our second piece of evidence and explain it. We pick our third, and then we write a link sentence. And that's going to be probably a little bit more than half a page. It's definitely going to score us around 8 to 9 or 7 or 8 maybe actually in our cumulative mark from an examiner's point of view. Okay, folks, last thing we're going to cover today is how I show my students to study for Leaving Cert History essays. So this template should become available to you guys, and it's how I study for those Leaving Cert History essays. We think about how big that Leaving Cert History course, we have to be able to condense large amounts of information down to 5 keywords, trigger words, paragraph titles. So hopefully when we come into our Leaving Cert essay, all we need to remember is our 8 paragraph titles, and we're going to be in a great spot and be able to recall information from each paragraph title. In order to engage in that process, we need to firstly chunk and condense information down into paragraph titles, and then we need to test ourselves from that paragraph title and test ourselves on our ability to recall information. I'm going to walk you through that process now, just to show you what that might look like. If we just zoom up on this studying template for Leaving Cert History essays, there's a couple of things that we need to do. So for every paragraph, we need to come up with 4 to 6 points. So on average, 5 points per paragraph. So first paragraph for our Eucharistic Congress, we're going to come up with, well, it's about influence of Catholic Church in Irish society. So we need to come up with 4 to 6 key points around that. So I write my 4 to 6 key points. I write them nice and small. They're not to be developed. They're just the main pieces of evidence that we need. Then we need to condense those 4 key points down into 4 key words. So it might look like this in this sense. Catholic Church was a powerful organisation in Irish society. Goes to Catholic Church. Influenced people at election time. Influenced election. And so on. Then from those 4 key words, we need to come up with 2 trigger words is what I suggest. So a trigger word is a word that's going to help trigger you remembering that information. So in this sense, my 2 trigger words were Catholic Church and influenced lower classes. Then we need to come up with a paragraph title that's going to summarize all that information. On the exam day, all we're going to need to remember is our paragraph title, and then we're going to be able to recall different pieces of information from that. So our paragraph title here would be the influence of the Catholic Church in Irish society. Let's go through how this works in reality. Alright lads, this video is going to cover how we study for our Leaving Cert History essays. So you can see from our worksheet here, we've 4 different columns. First one says 5 key points, 5 key words, trigger words, and a paragraph title. Now we're only to actually use this study worksheet once we have completed a Leaving Cert History essay. We've gotten feedback from myself, we've applied that feedback, and it's up to the standard that we want. So in the first column here, we have to summarize the 5 key points from your first paragraph within that essay. So you can see I'm summarizing them nice and small to make it a little bit easier to remember. I've got points like Redmond and the Home Rule Party introduced the third Home Rule Bill, Ireland get its own parliament, list of limitations, Britain can still interfere. Then we have to take those 5 key points and condense that down into 5 memorable keywords. So I've went for Redmond, Parliament, limitations, Irish laws, and a big X to say it wasn't successful. Now I have to turn those 5 keywords into what I like to think of 2 trigger words, words that are going to help us remember those 5 keywords. And then we come to the last section here and we add a paragraph title. So that paragraph deals with the introduction of the third Home Rule Bill in Ireland. Then we go down to paragraph 2. Once again, we're using our completed and updated essay where we've applied our feedback. And in the first column, we need to summarize the 5 key points from paragraph 2. We summarize them nice and small. We're not rewriting the paragraph here. So for here, I've wrote 470,000 men signed the Solemn League and Covenant. Some sign in their own blood, symbolism. I've also put down there the formation of the UVF, defeat the present conspiracy, the quote I want to use, and I've also put Asquith does nothing. So then I need to condense those 5 key points into 5 key words. So I've wrote 470,000 blood, UVF, conspiracy, and Asquith. Now I need to add 2 trigger words for our paragraph that's going to help trigger the key words that I'm trying to memorize. So I'm writing Ulster Solemn League and Covenant and UVF, and then I need to add a paragraph title here. Now I've actually made a mistake on the paragraph title and I've just rewritten my trigger words. Paragraph title here is Unionist Opposition to Home Rule. So we keep going for all 8 paragraph titles for our essay, and then we get a blank bit of paper, okay? And this is where the important part of our study comes in here. So now we use the columns within our worksheet to test ourselves. So I put a white piece of paper over it and I cover it and I try to test myself. Okay, what was the paragraph title for paragraph 1? What were the trigger words? And I correct it as I go. Now I move down to, can I remember the 5 keywords? So I try to remember the 5 keywords that I've listed there. I can't remember the 4th or 5th here. I'm going to make a guess at the 4th, but I can't remember the 5th for the life of me. Now I test or I check my self-assess my keywords against the keywords list, and I add the one that I've missed in red pen so I know I can identify the gaps in my own knowledge. And now I go down to the 5 key points, and I often find that the 5 key points are fine once I get 5 of the keywords. The 5 keywords are where I struggle. So now I'm just trying to use the keywords to memorize the points. What's important here is you're just honest with yourself and you actually test yourself. This worksheet is pointless unless you're actually completing the testing element of it. So now I use the 5 keywords to retrieve the 5 key points from that paragraph, and then we just do the same, correct them, and we move down to paragraph 2. So I need to remember the paragraph title, so it's Ulster Opposition. Now I need to, still covering, I check it and I cover the trigger words. Okay, my trigger words here were the Solemn League and Covenant and the UVF. And we continue this process on for our whole essay. And what's amazing about this, I suppose, study tactic for Leaving Cert History essays, you literally just keep the worksheet. You only have to complete it once, and you can go back to each essay and test yourself at each essay at regular intervals. So if I test myself here for this essay, attempts to obtain self-government 1911 to 23, I might leave it 2 weeks and come back and retest myself to see what I can remember, helping to identify the gaps in my knowledge. So I'm going to leave it there, lads. Literally send me a message if you are struggling with this, but I'll speak to you in class once again. So just before we finish up on today's Saturday session, just going to kind of highlight what's available on ExamRevision's website once again. So once again, we have our self-correcting, or we have our pre-recorded video lessons that covers every single topic on the course. They're usually about 10 to 15 minutes long, and it's me explaining each episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. So if you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, I explain the general concepts around that and the steps and phases of that sequence of events that led to or that contributed so hugely towards the overall civil rights movement. Then we have our self-correcting quizzes, my favorite aspect of this. Once again, hopefully your biggest takeaway here is, if you're looking to study successfully for Leaving Cert History, you need to be self-quizzing, you need to be testing yourself. We're studying for a test. In that test, you have to be able to recall large amounts of information from just different titles and different kind of trigger words in your head. You need to test yourself and be practicing that skill. We also have H1 standard notes, PowerPoints available, and every single past paper question for each topic. I'm going to leave it there, folks. Hopefully today has been beneficial for you, and hopefully your biggest takeaways is your understanding of the Leaving Cert History marking scheme, how that tells us everything we need to know, what we need to write, how long our paragraphs need to be, how we should structure our paragraphs, what type of information should be included in that, what a paragraph should be about, how long our essay should be. And then we looked at those study tactics that help boost your ability to recall information in the Leaving Cert History exam. You shouldn't be learning off whole essays. You should be learning off paragraph titles, and should be testing yourself and practicing that skill of recalling information from each paragraph title. Anyway, folks, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll speak to you soon.